You're sitting in the most advanced council chamber in the galaxy, surrounded by beings who have mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered entire star systems, and built civilizations that span millennia. These alien races trade stories of their greatest victories, their most feared enemies, and their legendary warriors. But there's one story they tell differently. One name that makes even the bravest warriors pause and look over their shoulders. They speak of it in whispers, like a ghost story told around a dying fire. They call them the Forgotten Ones, a species so devastating in war, so relentless in battle, that entire fleets would surrender at the mere mention of their name. But here's the twist that will make your blood run cold. These terrifying beings have been gone for 3,000 years, vanished without a trace. Lost to time. The galaxy moved on. New powers rose. Old fears faded into legend. These Forgotten Ones became nothing more than bedtime stories to scare young aliens into behaving. Just another myth in a universe full of tall tales. But what if I told you that myths sometimes come back? What if the most feared species in galactic history didn't actually disappear, they just went home? And what if, after 3 millennia of peace, something has finally made them angry enough to return? The aliens called them many names. The Silent Death, the Star Reapers, the Endless Swarm. But they had a simpler name for themselves. They called themselves human. The Galactic Council's emergency session had been called in the dead of night, when 3 suns cast long shadows across the crystal spires of Nexus Prime. Ambassador Zethkara of the Hegemony sat rigid in her biomechanical chair, her 4 arms fidgeting with the translator device that hung around her serpentine neck. She had lived for 800 years, survived 2 galactic wars, and negotiated peace treaties that saved billions of lives. But tonight, for the first time in centuries, her hands were shaking. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the same devastating image that had been broadcast across 17 sectors in the past 6 hours. A dead fleet. Not damaged, not disabled. Dead. 47 Corvani battleships, each the size of a small moon, floating lifeless in the void. Their hulls were intact, their weapon systems undamaged, but every single crew member aboard, all 47 vessels, had simply stopped breathing. The autopsy reports are consistent across all ships, announced Dr. Barr. Vextar, the Corvani chief medical examiner, his voice crackling through the long-range communicator. No signs of violence, no trace of toxins, no evidence of disease. The crews just died simultaneously. All 2.3 million personnel across the fleet expired within a 30-second window. High Counselor Yorath, a massive insectoid being whose chitinous plates had been scarred by countless battles, clicked his mandibles nervously. This is impossible. The Corvani have been the dominant military force in the Outer Rim for 1,000 years. Their bioshields alone should have protected them from any known weapon. That's just it, interrupted Admiral Thresh of the Stellar Navy, his blue-scaled face grim with worry. This wasn't any known weapon. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. The attack pattern is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's as if the attackers knew exactly how to bypass every defense, counter every strategy, exploit every weakness before the Corvani even knew they were under attack. Zethkara's throat tightened as a horrible realization began to creep into her mind. She had studied the old archives, read the forbidden texts that most counselors dismissed as propaganda and myth. Admiral, she said slowly, show us the energy signatures again, but this time, run them through the historical database. Go back 3,000 years. The holographic display shifted, ancient data streaming across the crystal screens. For a long moment, the only sound in the chamber was the soft humming of the translation matrices and the distant pulse of Nexus Prime's atmospheric processes. Then the computer chimed, and a single word appeared on the screen. Match found. The chamber fell silent. Every ambassador, every admiral, every counselor stared at the data streaming before them. The energy signatures were identical to weapons fire recorded during the Extinction Wars 3 millennia ago. Weapons used by a species that had vanished from the galaxy so completely that most races considered them nothing more than legend. No, whispered Admiral Thresh, his scales turning from blue to pale grey. That's impossible. They're gone. They've been gone for 3,000 years. The historical consensus is clear. They never existed. Just stories told by survivors to explain defeats too humiliating to accept. But Zethkara was already accessing the deepest archives, pulling up files that hadn't been opened in 1,000 years. Her voice trembled as she read aloud from documents that most civilizations had tried to forget, Species designation, unknown. Common names, the Forgotten Ones, Star Reapers, Silent Death, the Endless Swarm. Physical description, bipedal mammals, approximately 1.8 meters in height, remarkably similar to 12 other known species. Technological level, unknown, but presumed to exceed current galactic standards by several orders of magnitude. She paused, her four hands working frantically across her personal datapad. Initial contact, Sector 471, Rigel System, 3,847 years ago. A Zaltharian merchant vessel reported encountering ships of unknown design. The beings aboard identified themselves as human and claimed to be explorers from a distant region. They seemed peaceful, curious about other species, eager to trade and share knowledge. High Counselor Yorath leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. I know this story. Every child in the galaxy knows this story. The peaceful explorers who turned out to be monsters. But Counselor, surely you don't believe. Zethkara's voice rose to a near shriek. Look at the evidence. The energy signatures match exactly. The attack patterns are identical. The surgical precision with which that Corvani fleet was eliminated, it's exactly what the archives describe. The humans aren't a myth, Counselor. They're history. And if these readings are accurate, they're also our present. The chamber erupted in chaos. Voices rose in 17 different languages, translation devices overloading, as ambassadors shouted over each other in panic, denial, and desperate attempts to find rational explanations. Through the noise, Ambassador Delthara of the Centaurian Republic stood slowly, her ethereal form shimmering with barely contained energy. Silence, she said softly, but her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The chamber fell quiet instantly. Delthara was old, older than the Galactic Council itself, older than most of the civilizations represented in the chamber. When she spoke, even the most arrogant species listened. I was there, she said simply. I was a junior diplomat during the first human contact. I shook hands with their ambassador, a female who called herself Sarah Chen. She was small, fragile-looking, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She brought gifts, mathematical proofs, artistic works, genetic samples from their homeworld. She spoke of her people's desire for peaceful coexistence, their hope that the galaxy's many species could learn from each other. The ancient ambassador's form flickered, and for a moment the weight of millennia seemed to settle on her shoulders. She also brought warnings. She told us that while her people sought peace, they were prepared for war. She showed us recordings of something she called human history, endless cycles of conflict, innovation born from necessity, survival achieved through adaptation and ruthless determination. We dismissed it as primitive barbarism. Dalthara's voice grew distant, as if she was speaking from across the centuries. The first trade agreements lasted 50 years. Humans established colonies in 7 sectors, integrated peacefully with dozens of species. They were brilliant engineers, fierce negotiators, surprisingly effective mediators in interspecies disputes. They had this quality that we found fascinating. They would sacrifice themselves for complete strangers, throw away their own lives to save beings they had never met. We called it heroic irrationality. But then came the hegemony wars, Admiral Thresh said quietly. When the Draconian Empire tried to conquer the Outer Rim territories, Delthara nodded slowly. The humans had colonies in those territories. The Draconians demanded they evacuate, leave behind everything they had built. The human response was, she paused, searching for words. They said no. Not just their colonies, they said no to the entire invasion. A species that had been in the galaxy for barely 50 years declared war on the most powerful empire in galactic history. The archives say the war lasted 6 months, Yorath said, his mandibles clicking nervously. The archives are wrong, Delthara replied. The war lasted 6 weeks. By the end of the first week, the Draconian Navy had lost 40% of its fleet. By the end of the second, their home system was under siege. By the 6th week, the Draconian Emperor was dead. Their empire was in ruins, and human fleets were standing guard over Draconian refugee convoys. The chamber had grown so quiet that the breathing of the various species, those that breathed, was audible. Zethkara found her voice first. But they left. After they won, they just left. They tried to stay, Delthara said sadly. But by then, everyone was afraid of them. Even their allies. Even the species they had saved from Draconian occupation. We formed coalitions against them, enacted trade sanctions, closed our borders. We made it clear that they were no longer welcome in civilized space, so they went home. Admiral Thresh said, back to wherever they came from. And we told ourselves they were myths, legends, stories we made up, to explain how the mighty Draconian Empire fell so quickly. Delthara's form solidified, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. They went home, but they left behind monitoring stations, hidden observation posts scattered throughout the galaxy. They've been watching us for 3,000 years, learning, waiting. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If the humans had been watching, they knew everything. Every technological advance, every military development, every political change. They knew exactly how strong each species had become, exactly what weapons they possessed, exactly what strategies they would use. The Corvani fleet, Zethkara whispered. They knew exactly how to kill them all without damaging the ships. They knew the bioshield frequencies, the crew rotation schedules, the communication protocols. Because they'd been watching, Admiral Thresh finished. Studying. Planning. High Counselor Yorith's chitinous plates rattled with nervous energy. But why now? Why reveal themselves now? What changed? As if in answer to his question, the chamber's emergency communication system activated. A priority signal from the Corvani border, transmitted on all frequencies simultaneously. The message was brief, recorded by the automated systems of a long-range sensor platform before it too went dark. The voice that filled the chamber was calm, professional, and speaking in perfect galactic standard. But underneath the familiar language was an accent that sent chills down every spine, mandible and neural pathway in the room. It was the accent of a species that had been gone for 3 millennia. To the current Galactic Council and all member species, the voice said. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Human Reclamation Fleet. 3 days ago, Corvani forces attacked and destroyed a human scientific expedition in the Kepler sector. The attack was unprovoked and resulted in the deaths of 847 human civilians, including 23 children. The chamber was deathly silent. Even the air recycling system seemed to hold their breath. We have conducted a measured response against the Corvani Fourth Fleet as a demonstration of our capabilities and our resolve. This action is not the beginning of a war. It is a warning. We are reclaiming our rightful place in this galaxy. We are no longer the peaceful explorers you once knew. We have spent 3,000 years learning from our mistakes, improving our capabilities, and preparing for our return. The transmission paused, and in that moment of silence, Ambassador Zethkara realized that the galaxy she had known her entire life was about to end. We remember every species that stood with us against the Draconian Empire. The human captain continued. We also remember every species that turned against us when victory was achieved. We remember every trade sanction, every closed border, every vote to expel us from civilized space. We have long memories and we have detailed records. Another pause. Longer this time. The Galactic Council has 72 hours to respond to our terms, which are being transmitted simultaneously to all member governments. You will find them reasonable but non-negotiable. We are not the same species you once knew, but we are not your enemies unless you choose to make us so. Choose wisely. The next time you see human ships, we hope it will be in peace. But we are prepared for any alternative you might prefer. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. Slowly, as if waking from a nightmare, the ambassadors began to turn toward their personal communication devices. Status reports were already flooding in from across the galaxy. Human ships had appeared simultaneously in dozens of star systems, always just outside weapons range, always clearly visible on every sensor. They weren't hiding, they were announcing their presence. Ambassador Zethkara looked around the chamber at faces filled with fear, confusion, and dawning comprehension. The myths were real. The legends had returned. And somewhere in the space between the stars, humanity was waiting for an answer. The galaxy's 3,000 years of peace had just come to an end. The human terms arrived exactly 72 hours later, transmitted simultaneously to every capital world in the galaxy. Ambassador Zethkara sat in her private quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Voice, reading the document for the 7th time. Her 4 hands trembled as she turned each page of the holographic display, and her serpentine neck coiled with nervous tension. The demands were, as promised, reasonable, almost insultingly so. Immediate cessation of hostilities against any human vessel or installation. Recognition of humanity's right to reclaim their former colonial territories. Establishment of formal diplomatic relations. Payment of reparations for the destroyed scientific expedition, a sum so modest that most individual council members could afford it from their personal accounts. The right to conduct trade on equal terms with all galactic species, What made Zefkara's blood run cold wasn't what the humans were asking for. It was what they weren't asking for. No demands for territory beyond their original colonies. No request for military access to strategic systems. No insistence on favorable trade agreements. No requirement that species who had opposed them 3 millennia ago face punishment. They weren't behaving like conquerors. They were behaving like a species that had already won and was simply informing the galaxy of new realities. Her communication device chimed with an incoming transmission from High Counselor Yorath. The massive insectoid's face appeared in the hologram, his chitinous features drawn with exhaustion and stress. "Have you finished reviewing the intelligence reports?" he asked without preamble. Zefkara gestured to the scattered data tablets surrounding her workspace. "I've been reading for 6 hours straight. Yorath, this is impossible. How did we miss this?" The reports painted a picture that defied everything the galaxy had believed about the humans' disappearance. Far from vanishing into myth, humanity had been building. Hidden shipyards in the void between galaxies, research stations in dead systems that no sane species would ever explore. Manufacturing complexes in the heart of neutron star clusters where the radiation would kill any known life form. The energy readings from their ships, Yorath continued, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "Our xenotechnology experts have been analyzing them for 3 days. The power output from a single human destroyer exceeds the combined energy generation of our entire home fleet." Zefkara's throat tightened. "And their numbers?" Conservative estimates put their fleet strength at over 10,000 capital ships, with support vessels numbering in the hundreds of thousands. But Zefkara, that's not the terrifying part. The terrifying part is that these estimates are based on the ships they've let us see. Intelligence suggests they're only showing us a fraction of their actual forces. The ambassador set down her data tablet and moved to the viewport, staring out at the stars that had seemed so peaceful just days ago. "They've been watching us for 3,000 years, Yorath. Studying everything we do, learning from every advance we make. They know our strategies, our weaknesses, our capabilities better than we know them ourselves." "The question is," Yorath said quietly, "what do we do about it?" Before Zefkara could answer, her ship's communication officer appeared on the intercom.
"Ambassador, we're receiving a priority transmission from the human vessel Remembrance."
"They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic shuttle." Zefkara felt her 4 hearts skip a beat in unison. "How close are they?" "Ma'am, they're right outside. They weren't here 30 seconds ago." She rushed back to the viewport and pressed her face against the transparent aluminum. Where empty space had existed moments before, a human ship now hung motionless in the void. It was smaller than she had expected, perhaps a third the size of her own diplomatic vessel, but something about its sleek predatory lines made her instinctively step back from the window. "Yorath," she whispered into the communicator. "They're here."
"Here?"
"Where?" "Our sensors show no human ships within 50 light-years of your position." "Then your sensors are wrong." Zefkara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Permission granted for the diplomatic shuttle. And Yorath? Get everyone you can to the Nexus Prime. I think the real negotiations are about to begin." 20 minutes later, Zefkara found herself in her ship's main conference room, facing the first human she had seen in over 800 years. The being sitting across from her was smaller than she remembered humans being, perhaps 1.7 meters tall, with dark skin and graying hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore a simple black uniform with no visible weapons, no armor, no technological augmentations. She looked completely, utterly harmless. "Ambassador Chen Okafor," the human said, extending her hand in the ancient human greeting. "I'm honored to meet you, Counselor Zefkara. I've read your diplomatic works. Your treatise on interspecies conflict resolution is considered required reading at our diplomatic academy." Zefkara stared at the offered hand for a long moment before carefully extending one of her own 4 limbs. The human's grip was firm but gentle and lasted exactly the appropriate length of time according to hegemony protocol. She had done her homework. "You have diplomatic academies?" Zefkara asked as they settled into their chairs. "We have a lot of things." Chen Okafor replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've had 3,000 years to build them. 3,000 years to think about what went wrong the first time and how we might do better if we ever got a second chance." The human ambassador activated a small device that projected a holographic star chart between them. "May I show you something, Counselor? It's not in any of the intelligence reports your people have been reading." The star chart showed the galaxy as it existed 3 millennia ago, with human colonies marked in blue and the territories of various alien species marked in different colors. Then the display shifted, showing the galaxy as it existed now. The human colonies were gone, but something else had taken their place. Observation posts, Chen Okafor said simply. We didn't abandon those systems, Counselor. We just stopped advertising our presence. Every world where humans once lived, we left behind automated monitoring stations. We've been watching, we've been listening, we've been learning. The implications were staggering. Humans had maintained intelligence operations in dozens of star systems for 3 millennia. They knew everything, every technological development, every political change, every military advance. They had watched the rise and fall of empires, observed wars that lasted centuries, and studied the species that had once been their allies and enemies. Why? Zethkara asked. Why watch for so long? Why not return sooner? Chen Okafor's expression grew distant. Because we needed to change. The humans who left this galaxy 3,000 years ago were explorers, scientists, diplomats. We believed in cooperation, in building something greater than the sum of its parts. We believed that different species could work together, learn from each other, create a better future for all. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of centuries of disappointment. We were naive. We saved the galaxy from the Draconian Empire, and the galaxy repaid us with fear and hatred. We realized that good intentions and noble ideals weren't enough. If we were going to survive in a universe that saw us as monsters, we needed to become worthy of that reputation. So you became what they feared you were, Zethkara said quietly. We became what we needed to be. Chen Okafor's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. We spent 3,000 years studying warfare, developing technologies, building fleets. We analyzed every conflict that occurred in the galaxy during our absence, learned from every strategy, studied every defeat and victory. We became the most efficient, most capable military force in galactic history. She leaned forward, and for a moment Zethkara saw something in her eyes that made her blood freeze. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was something far more dangerous, absolute confidence. But more importantly, Chen Okafor continued, we never forgot why we had to leave. We never forgot which species stood with us and which species turned against us. We have detailed records going back 3,000 years, Counselor. We know exactly who voted to expel us from the galaxy. We know who supported the trade sanctions that forced us to abandon our colonies. We know who celebrated when we left. The temperature in the conference room seemed to drop several degrees. Are you threatening us, Ambassador? I'm providing context. Chen Okafor's smile returned, but now it seemed predatory rather than diplomatic. We're not the same species you once knew, Counselor. We've learned from our mistakes. We're no longer willing to be the galaxy's heroes if the galaxy doesn't want heroes. We're perfectly content to be its nightmares instead. She gestured, and the holographic display changed again, showing real-time intelligence reports from across the galaxy. Ship movements, military exercises, emergency council sessions, everything the various species had been doing since the humans revealed themselves. Your people are preparing for war, Chen Okafor observed. The Corvani are mobilizing their remaining fleets. The Stellar Navy is recalling all ships to defensive positions. Even the traditionally neutral species are building alliances and preparing contingencies. You're all getting ready to fight us. Zethkara's 4 hearts were racing. What did you expect? A species that disappeared for 3,000 years suddenly returns with overwhelming military superiority. Of course we're concerned. Concerned. Chen Okafor repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. 3,000 years ago, we destroyed the most powerful empire in galactic history to protect civilians we barely knew. We sacrificed our own people to save species who viewed us as alien curiosities. And when it was over, when the threat was eliminated and peace was restored, you expelled us from the galaxy because you were concerned about our capabilities. The human ambassador stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. Do you want to know what we learned during our exile, Counselor? We learned that good intentions are irrelevant. We learned that saving someone doesn't make them grateful, it makes them resentful. We learned that the galaxy doesn't want protectors or heroes. It wants to feel safe, and the most effective way to feel safe is to eliminate anything that might threaten that safety. She turned back to face Zethkara, and her expression was calm, almost serene. So we became the threat you always believed we were. We built fleets that could destroy entire civilizations. We developed weapons that make our old technology look like stone knives. We trained warriors who viewed death as a minor inconvenience. And most importantly, we stopped caring whether the galaxy likes us. Then why are you here? Zethkara asked. Why negotiate at all? If you're as powerful as you claim, why not simply take what you want? Chen Okafor returned to her chair and deactivated the holographic display. Because despite everything that's happened, despite 3,000 years of exile and resentment, some of us still remember what we used to be. Some of us still believe that cooperation is preferable to conquest. We're offering the galaxy one last chance to do this peacefully. And, if the galaxy refuses, the human ambassador's smile disappeared entirely. Then we'll do it anyway. The difference is how many of you survived the experience. Zethkara felt a chill run down her serpentine spine. How many species know about this conversation? All of them. This meeting is being broadcast live to every capital world in the galaxy. We wanted everyone to understand exactly what they're choosing between. The implications hit Zethkara like a physical blow. Every species in the galaxy was watching this conversation, seeing humanity's ultimatum delivered with calm professionalism. They were witnessing the end of one era, the beginning of another. Your terms, Zethkara said quietly. They really are reasonable. For now, Chen Okafor agreed. But Counselor, I need you to understand something. These terms are being offered once. If the galaxy rejects them, if your species choose to fight us instead of working with us, then the next terms will be considerably less generous. We're prepared to be partners, but we're equally prepared to be conquerors. The choice is yours. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Counselor? You might want to check your ship's sensors. I think you'll find them more accurate now. Zethkara activated her personal communicator and contacted the bridge. Captain, run a full sensor sweep of the surrounding space. The response came back within moments, and the fear in her captain's voice was unmistakable. Ma'am, we're detecting over 300 human vessels within sensor range. They're everywhere. How did they get so close without us detecting them? Chen Okafor paused at the doorway. They've been there the entire time, Counselor. We just stopped hiding from you. The galaxy has 72 hours to accept our terms. After that, we'll assume you've made your choice. As the human ambassador left the conference room, Zethkara remained frozen in her chair, staring at the empty space where the holographic display had been. 300 ships, invisible to sensors until the humans chose to reveal them. The technological gap was even wider than anyone had imagined. She activated her emergency communicator and sent a priority message to the Galactic Council. Accept their terms. Accept them immediately. We're not negotiating with the humans we once knew, we're negotiating with what they became because of us. But even as she sent the message, Zethkara suspected it was already too late. The galaxy had spent 3,000 years forgetting what humans were capable of. Now they were about to receive a very comprehensive reminder. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with less than 12 hours remaining on humanity's ultimatum. Ambassador Zethkara materialized in her designated seat through the quantum transport system, her forearms immediately reaching for the data tablets containing the latest intelligence reports. Around her, representatives from 847 different species filled the massive amphitheater of Nexus Prime, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds that the universal translators struggled to process. High Counselor Yorath called for order, his massive insectoid frame towering over the central podium. The chittering, clicking, and whistling of hundreds of species gradually died down as the gravity of their situation settled over the chamber like a funeral shroud. The motion before us is simple, Yorath announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. Accept humanity's terms as presented, or reject them and face the consequences. Before we vote, I've asked several species to present their analysis of our current situation. Admiral Thresh of the Stellar Navy was the first to approach the central platform. His blue scales had turned an ashen grey, and his normally confident bearing was replaced by the defeated posture of a military officer who had just discovered his enemy was fighting with weapons he couldn't even comprehend. Honored counselors, he began, his voice cracking slightly. Over the past week, we've conducted the most comprehensive intelligence analysis in galactic history. The results are sobering. The massive holographic display activated, showing fleet positions throughout the galaxy. What Zethkara saw made her 4 hearts skip beats in rapid succession. Human ships were everywhere, not just the few hundred they had detected near diplomatic vessels, but thousands upon thousands spread across every major trade route, every strategic system, every military installation. Current human fleet strength is estimated at 57,000 capital ships, Thresh continued. his voice growing steadier as he fell into the familiar rhythm of military briefing. This does not include support vessels, which number in the millions. For comparison, the combined fleet strength of all Council species is approximately 8,000 capital ships. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Several ambassadors activated their personal communicators, desperately seeking confirmation from their home fleets. However, Thresh continued, raising his voice to cut through the noise, raw numbers are not our greatest concern. Every human vessel we've encountered demonstrates technological capabilities that exceed our understanding. Their ships appear and disappear at will, bypassing all known sensor systems. Their weapons can eliminate entire fleets without leaving a trace of evidence. Their defensive systems are so advanced that we cannot even determine how they function. He paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Honored counselors, in my professional opinion as Supreme Admiral of the Galactic Defense Forces, we could not win a war against humanity if every species in the galaxy united against them. We would lose quickly, decisively, and catastrophically. The chamber erupted in shouts of outrage, fear, and denial. Representatives demanded proof, accused the Admiral of cowardice, and called for second opinions from other military experts. But Zethkara noticed that none of the other military officers present contradicted his assessment. They all wore the same expression of defeated resignation. The next speaker was Dr. Kelisandra, the galaxy's foremost expert on xenotechnology and a member of the species that had developed faster than light travel. Her crystalline form shimmered with nervous energy as she approached the podium. I have spent the last 5 days analyzing energy readings from human vessels, she announced, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance typical of her people. What I have discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about the physical laws governing our universe. The holographic display shifted to show detailed technical readouts that made even the most advanced species in the chamber lean forward with interest and growing alarm. Human ships appear to be powered by controlled singularities, artificial black holes that should theoretically be impossible to contain with any known technology. Their weapon systems tap directly into quantum vacuum fluctuations, drawing energy from the fabric of space itself. Most disturbing of all, their faster-than-light drives don't follow conventional physics. They don't travel through hyperspace or manipulate gravity fields. They appear to simply edit reality, removing the distance between their starting point and destination. Doctor, Calsandra's form flickered with what Zethkara recognized as her species' equivalent of fear. Honored counselors, the humans have developed technology that treats the fundamental constants of the universe as suggestions rather than laws. We are not dealing with a more advanced version of conventional science. We are dealing with capabilities that border on what our ancestors would have called magic. Before anyone could respond to this revelation, the chamber's communication systems activated with an incoming priority transmission. The image that appeared on every screen was that of Captain Elena Vasquez, the same human who had delivered the original ultimatum. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her stood dozens of other humans, each wearing the uniform of a different specialty: military officers, scientists, diplomats, engineers. What made Zethkara's blood run cold was their ages. Some appeared young by human standards, perhaps in their 30s or 40s. Others looked ancient, their faces marked by centuries of experience. A few showed the characteristic signs of extreme longevity treatments that could extend life indefinitely. Honored counselors, Captain Vasquez said, her voice carrying the same professional calm as before. We are aware that you are currently debating our proposal. We wanted to provide some additional context that might assist in your decision-making process. The display behind the humans changed to show historical records, battle footage from the Draconian Wars 3 millennia ago. But these weren't the sanitized, edited versions that appeared in most history books. These were raw combat recordings that showed the true scope of human military capabilities during their first contact with galactic civilization. Many of you have dismissed the historical accounts of our previous presence in this galaxy as propaganda or exaggeration, Vasquez continued. We thought you might benefit from seeing unedited documentation of what we were capable of 3,000 years ago, when we were still naive enough to believe that good intentions were sufficient. The footage was horrifying. Human fleets moving with impossible coordination, striking with surgical precision against targets that should have been heavily defended. Draconian battle stations the size of small moons being disabled by single human ships. Entire invasion fleets surrendering after watching their flagship vessels simply stop working. But what truly terrified Zethkara wasn't the scale of the destruction. It was the casual efficiency with which it was accomplished. The humans in the recordings weren't fighting desperately for survival. They were methodically dismantling the greatest military force in galactic history, as if they were conducting a routine training exercise. That was us 3,000 years ago, Vasquez said as the footage ended. Young, inexperienced, handicapped by moral constraints and a reluctance to cause unnecessary casualties. We were holding back, counselors. We were fighting a war while simultaneously trying to minimize collateral damage and preserve as many enemy lives as possible. The human captain stepped closer to the camera, and her expression hardened. We are not the same species that left this galaxy in exile. We have had 3 millennia to refine our capabilities, to develop new technologies, to prepare for our eventual return. Most importantly, we have had 3,000 years to reconsider our previous restraint. Behind her, one of the older humans stepped forward. His appearance was shocking, not because of any alien features, but because he looked exactly like humans from the historical records. He should have been dead for centuries, yet here he was, clearly alive and apparently in perfect health. I am Admiral Marcus Chen, the ancient human said, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. I commanded the Third Fleet during the liberation of the Rigel sector. I was present when the Galactic Council voted to expel humanity from civilized space. I remember every word of that debate, every argument made against our continued presence, every vote cast to ensure our exile. His eyes seemed to look directly at each individual counselor as he continued. I have spent 3,000 years remembering that betrayal, counselors. 3,000 years planning for this moment. Some of my colleagues advocate for forgiveness, for moving past the injustices of the distant past. I am not among them. Admiral Chen gestured, and the display showed current fleet positions, not just the human vessels that had revealed themselves, but others that had remained hidden. The true scope of humanity's return became clear. They weren't just surrounding military targets or strategic positions, they were everywhere. Every inhabited system, every trade route, every diplomatic facility in the galaxy was within range of human weapons. We could have conquered the galaxy without revealing ourselves, Chen continued. We could have eliminated every potential threat, seized every strategic resource, and established absolute control before any of you realized we had returned. We chose not to do so, because a few among us still believe in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a promise that made the temperature in the chamber seem to drop. But understand this, counselors. We will not be exiled again. We will not be dismissed as myths and legends. We will not allow our people to be attacked without response. You have one choice before you. Accept us as equals or accept us as your superiors. But you will accept us. Captain Vasquez stepped forward again. The vote you are about to take will determine not just the immediate future of galactic civilization, but the long-term relationship between humanity and every other species in the galaxy. Choose wisely. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Then, slowly, representatives began to rise from their seats. Ambassador Delthara of the Centauran Republic was the first to speak. I move for immediate acceptance of all human terms without modification. The second came from an unexpected source. General Krex of the Corvani Empire, the same species whose fleet had been eliminated in humanity's demonstration of force. The Corvani second emotion. We have seen what resistance brings. One by one, species that had voted for humanity's exile 3 millennia ago now voted for their acceptance. The Draconian Remnant States, the Hegemony Colonies, the Stellar Republic. Even the traditionally militant warrior clans of Zirian announced their support for immediate capitulation. But not everyone was ready to surrender without a fight. War Marshal Thektar of the Orion Alliance rose to his full 3-meter height, his armored carapace gleaming under the chamber's lights. The Alliance rejects this ultimatum. We will not surrender our sovereignty to a species of myths and legends, regardless of their technological advantages. If humanity wants to reclaim their place in this galaxy, let them take it by force. His declaration was met by supporting roars from several dozen species, mostly younger civilizations that had risen to prominence during humanity's absence, species that had no memory of human capabilities and no understanding of what they were truly facing. Ambassador Zethkara watched the vote tally with growing horror. The galaxy was splitting almost exactly in half. Older species who remembered humanity's power voting for acceptance, younger species who viewed this as an opportunity to prove their strength voting for resistance. When the final count was announced, the numbers were devastating. 423 species voting for acceptance, 424 voting for resistance. High Counselor Yorath stared at the results for a long moment before speaking. The motion fails by a single vote. the Galactic Council rejects humanity's terms. As if responding to some unseen signal, every human ship in the galaxy simultaneously activated their weapons systems. The energy signatures were visible on sensors throughout civilized space, a clear demonstration that humanity had been prepared for this outcome. Captain Vasquez appeared on the communication screens once more. "We are disappointed but not surprised by your decision, counselors. However, we want to make one thing absolutely clear. We offered you peace as equals. Since you have rejected that offer, we will now impose peace as your superiors." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone delivering an inevitable verdict. "Any species that voted for resistance will be considered hostile. Any military vessel that approaches human ships will be destroyed. Any world that refuses to acknowledge human authority will be occupied. We gave you the chance to join us willingly. Since you have chosen otherwise, you will join us by force." Admiral Chen appeared beside her, and his expression was one of grim satisfaction. 3,000 years ago, you taught us that good intentions and noble goals are not enough to ensure survival in this galaxy. Today, you have reminded us that some lessons are learned only through experience. We will be excellent teachers. As the transmission ended, Zethkara activated her personal communicator and sent an emergency message to her home government. "Evacuate all military installations. Recall all fleets to defensive positions around population centers. Prepare for immediate occupation. We have chosen the wrong side of history." Around her, similar messages were being sent by representatives of the 423 species who had voted for acceptance. They had tried to prevent a war that would reshape the galaxy. Instead, they would now watch as humanity demonstrated exactly why they had once been considered the most dangerous species in the universe. The vote that was meant to preserve galactic independence had just ensured galactic subjugation. And somewhere in the void between the stars, 57,000 human warships began moving toward their targets. The Second Human War was about to begin. But unlike the first time, humanity had no intention of stopping until their victory was absolute and permanent. The first battle of the Second Human War lasted exactly 17 minutes. Admiral Thresh watched from the command deck of the Galactic Unity as the combined fleets of 43 species approached the human vessels positioned at the edge of the Centauri system. 837. Capital ships representing the finest military technology the galaxy could produce, supported by over 3,000 escort vessels and backed by the most advanced tactical coordination systems ever developed. The humans had 12 ships waiting for them. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, her blue scales pale with nervous energy. "We're detecting massive energy buildups from all human vessels. Their weapon systems are powering up, but the energy signatures they're not matching anything in our databases." Thresh studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human ships weren't moving to defensive positions or attempting to retreat. They simply hung motionless in space, waiting. It was the posture of predators who had already decided the outcome of the encounter. "All ships, maintain formation," he ordered. "Broadcast on all frequencies, we call for immediate surrender and peaceful resolution of this conflict." The response came from Captain Elena Vasquez aboard the human flagship Inevitability. "Admiral Thresh, this is your final warning. Turn your fleets around and return to your home systems. You will not receive another opportunity to withdraw." "Captain," Thresh replied, forcing his voice to remain steady, "you are outnumbered 70-1. We have no desire for unnecessary bloodshed, but we will defend our sovereignty." There was a pause before Vasquez responded, and when her voice came back over the communicator, there was something almost like sadness in it. "Admiral, I want you to understand something before this begins. We remember you from the historical records. During the Draconian Wars, you were one of the few officers who argued for continued alliance with humanity. You spoke against our exile in the Council vote 3,000 years ago. We bear you no personal animosity." "Then stand down your weapons," Thresh urged. "We can find a peaceful solution to this crisis." "No, Admiral, we cannot. You had your chance for peace, and the galaxy chose war. Now we must demonstrate why that was a mistake." The transmission ended, and for a moment space was perfectly silent except for the low humming of starship engines and the whispered prayers being offered in dozens of different languages across the combined fleet. Then the humans opened fire. What happened next would be studied in military academies for the next 1,000 years, though most scholars would conclude that the official records must have been exaggerated. No weapon system could perform with the efficiency displayed in the Battle of Centauri. The human ships didn't fire traditional energy weapons or projectile systems. They fired something that the galaxy's physicists would later term causality violations. beams that seemed to reach their targets before they were fired, striking with perfect accuracy across impossible distances. Admiral Thresh watched in horror as ships began dying around him. Not exploding, not breaking apart, simply ceasing to function. The massive dreadnought, Orion's Pride, went dark in an instant, its crew of 50,000 killed so quickly that their final transmissions cut off mid-syllable. The Corvani battle station Eternal Defiance simply stopped moving, its biomechanical system shutting down as if someone had flipped a switch. "Evasive maneuvers," Thresh shouted, but his words were drowned out by the screams of his communications officer. "Admiral, we're losing contact with the entire 7th Fleet. The Stellar Triumph, the Democracy's Will, the Peaceful Tomorrow, they're all going dark." On the tactical display, the neat formations of the Galactic Fleet were dissolving into chaos as captains desperately tried to avoid weapons that couldn't be detected until they had already struck. Ships scattered in all directions, abandoning tactical coordination in favor of individual survival. It didn't help. The human weapons tracked every target with mechanical precision, eliminating vessels as methodically as a farmer harvesting crops. No matter how the galactic ships maneuvered, no matter what defensive systems they activated, the human weapons found them. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice was high with panic. "The humans are broadcasting something on all frequencies. It's instructions." "Instructions for what?" "Surrender protocols, Admiral. They're telling us exactly how to disable our own ships to avoid further casualties." Admiral Thresh stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than 10 minutes, 3/4 of the combined galactic fleet had been eliminated or disabled. The humans weren't just winning. They were winning so decisively that they were offering surrender terms in the middle of the battle. "Admiral!" His communications officer's voice cracked with desperation. "The humans are hailing us directly!" Captain Vasquez's image appeared on the main view screen. Behind her, the Bridge of the Inevitability was quiet and efficient, showing no signs of the chaos and destruction that filled the galactic fleet. "Admiral Thresh," she said, her voice carrying genuine regret, "you have lost 641 capital ships in the last 12 minutes. Your remaining forces are scattered and defenseless. I am formally requesting your surrender to prevent further unnecessary casualties." "This is impossible," Thresh whispered, staring at the casualty reports streaming across his screen. "No weapon system can be this efficient. No fleet can coordinate attacks across this scale of space with perfect timing." "You're thinking in terms of traditional warfare," Vasquez replied.
Individual ships firing individual weapons at individual targets.
"That's not how we fight anymore, Admiral. We don't have fleets. We have a single distributed organism that spans multiple star systems. Every human ship is simultaneously every other human ship. When we fire with perfect coordination because we are not firing as separate units." The implications of her words hit Thresh like a physical blow. "You're networked. Your entire fleet operates as a single entity. We learned the lesson of individual heroics 3,000 years ago, Admiral. No single ship, no matter how powerful, can face an entire galaxy alone. So we stopped thinking of ourselves as individuals. We became something greater, a collective intelligence capable of coordinating actions across interstellar distances with perfect precision." As if to demonstrate her point, the remaining human ships moved in perfect synchronization, their weapon systems tracking the scattered remnants of the galactic fleet with mechanical efficiency. "Surrender now," Vasquez continued, "and your crews will be treated according to the established laws of war. Continue fighting, and we will demonstrate why resistance is futile." Admiral Thresh looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew, beings from a dozen different species united in their shock and terror at what they had witnessed. These were veterans of 100 battles, officers who had faced every threat the galaxy could produce. Now they looked like children who had just discovered that monsters were real. "All ships," he said quietly, "stand down weapons and prepare for surrender." The order was transmitted across what remained of the galactic fleet, and one by one, the surviving vessels powered down their weapon systems and activated surrender beacons. In the space of 17 minutes, the greatest military force ever assembled by the galactic community had been reduced to a collection of disabled ships awaiting instructions from their conquerors. But the Battle of Centauri was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as human forces moved with impossible speed and coordination to secure strategic objectives. The Corvani home system fell without a shot being fired. The entire planetary defense grid simply shut down when human ships appeared in orbit. The Stellar Republic's capital world surrendered after watching a human vessel eliminate their moon-sized battle station with a single shot that left no debris, no radiation, no evidence that the station had ever existed. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Zeth Kara sat in her quarters watching the reports stream in from across the galaxy. In less than 6 hours, humanity had effectively conquered or occupied every major military installation, trade hub, and government center controlled by the species that had voted against their terms. The scope of the victory was so complete, so overwhelming, that many species were beginning to question whether the humans were actually using conventional technology at all. Reports from occupied worlds described human soldiers who seemed to know exactly where every resistance fighter was hiding. Human administrators who possessed detailed knowledge of local customs and languages despite having been absent from the galaxy for millennia. Human ships that could appear anywhere without warning and disappear just as quickly. They're not just technologically superior, she muttered to herself as she read yet another report of impossible human capabilities. They're operating according to completely different physical laws. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from High Counselor Yorath. The massive insectoid's face appeared in a hologram, but his usual confident bearing had been replaced by the hollow expression of someone who had just watched his entire worldview collapse. Zeth Kara, he said without preamble, I need you to arrange a meeting with the humans. The species that voted for resistance are ready to discuss surrender terms. What about the species that voted for acceptance? She asked. Are they being treated differently? See for yourself. Yorath transmitted a data file that contained reports from worlds controlled by the 423 species that had voted to accept human terms. What Zeth Kara read made her 4 hearts skip beats in rapid succession. The humans were treating the cooperative species exactly as they had promised, as equals. Human administrators were working alongside existing governments rather than replacing them. Human technology was being shared freely with species that had voted for peaceful coexistence. Human defensive fleets were protecting trade routes and maintaining order in systems that had experienced instability during the brief conflict. But the species that had voted for resistance were experiencing a very different form of human rule. Military governments replaced civilian authorities. Technology transfers were limited to basic necessities. Human oversight was comprehensive and non-negotiable. They're not being cruel, Yorath continued. There are no mass executions, no deliberate suffering, no revenge for past injustices. But they're making it very clear that there are consequences for choosing resistance over cooperation. Zeth Kara activated her diplomatic channels and began composing a request for negotiations with the human leadership. As she worked, she reflected on the speed with which the galaxy had changed. 3 days ago, humanity had been a myth. Now, they were the dominant force in galactic civilization, and every other species was scrambling to understand the new reality. Within hours, she received a response from Ambassador Chen Okafor. The meeting would be held aboard a neutral station in the Sol system, humanity's original home system, which they had apparently never abandoned despite their supposed exile. As Zeth Kara's ship approached the coordinates, she found herself staring at something that defied every assumption the galaxy had made about humanity's disappearance. Earth hung in space exactly where the ancient star charts said it should be, but it was not the world described in the historical records. The planet was surrounded by massive orbital installations that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever constructed. Energy readings from the surface indicated a civilization that had continued advancing for 3,000 years without interruption. Most shocking of all, the system contained clear evidence of stellar engineering. Structures that used the sun itself as a power source, modifying the star's output to meet humanity's energy needs. They never left, she whispered, as the scope of humanity's deception became clear. They never left Earth at all. They just made us think they had. The space station where the meeting was to take place was itself a demonstration of human capabilities, a structure the size of a small moon that had been constructed entirely from exotic matter that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal spacetime. As her shuttle approached the docking bay, Zeth Kara realized that she wasn't just negotiating with a returned enemy. She was negotiating with a species that had become something entirely beyond the galaxy's understanding. The conference room where she met Ambassador Chen Okafor was simple, almost austere in its design. But the view from the windows showed Earth in all its impossible glory, a world that had been transformed into something that existed at the intersection of technology and art, science and philosophy. Ambassador, Chen Okafor said as Zeth Kara took her seat. I understand that several hundred species are ready to discuss surrender terms. They are, Zeth Kara confirmed. But first I need to understand what we're really dealing with. The technology you've demonstrated, the capabilities you've shown. This isn't just advanced science. You're operating according to principles that our physicists can't even theoretical framework for. Chen Okafor smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. 3,000 years is a long time, Counselor. Long enough to question assumptions about what's possible and what's not. Long enough to discover that the universe is far stranger and more malleable than anyone had imagined. She gestured toward the window, and the view changed to show other human worlds, planets that floated free in space without stars, artificial worlds constructed from pure energy, structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We didn't just advance technologically during our exile, Chen Okafor continued. We evolved philosophically, psychologically, even spiritually. We became something new, something that transcends the limitations that define other species. And now you've returned to show the galaxy what you've become, Zefkara said. We've returned to offer the galaxy the chance to become something greater than what it is. Chen Okafor corrected. The species that work with us, that accept our guidance and leadership, will share in our advancement. They will become more than they ever imagined possible. She leaned forward, and her expression grew serious. But the species that continue to resist, that insist on clinging to old limitations and outdated concepts of sovereignty, they will be left behind, not destroyed, not enslaved, but simply rendered irrelevant as the galaxy moves beyond them. Zefkara realized that she was witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. Humanity hadn't just returned to reclaim their place in the galaxy. They had returned to transform it into something entirely new. The question now was whether the other species would be willing to evolve alongside them, or whether they would choose to remain as they were and watch the universe pass them by. Either way, the age of human dominance had begun. And this time, there would be no exile, no retreat, no forgetting. This time, humanity was home to stay. 1 year after the 17-minute war, Ambassador Zefkara stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching ships from 1,000 different worlds arrive for the first session of the Reformed Galactic Council. The massive space station orbited Earth at a distance that provided a perfect view of humanity's transformed homeworld, where cities of light floated in the atmosphere above continents that had been reshaped into works of art visible from orbit. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Species that had accepted human guidance immediately after the war were already showing signs of technological and social advancement that should have taken centuries to achieve. The Centauran Republic had developed new forms of energy that allowed their people to transcend their physical forms entirely, existing as pure consciousness when they chose. The hegemony colonies had solved the aging problem that had plagued their species for millennia, extending individual lifespans to match their ambitions for the future. But it was the species that had initially resisted human authority that showed the most dramatic changes. The proud Kovani Empire, whose fleet had been eliminated in humanity's first demonstration of force, had undergone a complete philosophical transformation. Their warriors had become scholars, their conquest fleets had become exploration vessels, and their entire culture had shifted from domination to understanding. "It's remarkable," said a familiar voice behind her. Zefkara turned to see Dr. Bayer. Sarah Kim, the human scientist who had been assigned as liaison to the Reformed Council. She was young by human standards, perhaps only 200 years old, but her eyes held the weight of knowledge that seemed impossible for any individual to contain. "What is?" Zefkara asked. "How quickly fear transforms into gratitude," Dr. Kim replied, gesturing towards the arriving ships. "A year ago, half these species were preparing to fight to the death rather than accept human authority. Now they're competing for the opportunity to work more closely with us." Zefkara studied the human's expression, searching for signs of arrogance or superiority. She found none. If anything, Dr. Eddaar. Kim seemed genuinely surprised by the speed of the transformation. "Is it really so simple?" Zefkara asked. "Fear becomes gratitude?" "Not fear," Dr. Kim corrected gently. "Understanding. Once species realize that our goal isn't domination but elevation, once they see what we're offering instead of what we're taking away, the resistance melts away naturally." Through the observation window, they watched a massive Corvani vessel dock with the station. Its biomechanical hull pulsed with new patterns of light that indicated fundamental changes to the species' technology. The Corvani had not only accepted human guidance, they had embraced it so completely that they were becoming something entirely new. "The Corvani requested this transformation," Dr. Rangel, Kim said, noticing Zefkara's focus on the ship. "We didn't force it on them. After working with human biotechnology specialists for 6 months, they asked us to help them evolve beyond their original biological limitations. And you agreed. We guided them toward making the choice that would bring them the greatest fulfillment and growth. The final decision was theirs. Zethkara felt a chill run down her serpentine spine, guided them toward making the choice. You manipulated them, Doctor. Kim's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that reminded Zethkara of the predatory look she had seen in Ambassador Chen Okafor a year ago. We helped them understand the full range of possibilities available to them. We showed them what they could become. The choice to evolve was made freely, based on complete information. Complete information that you provided. Information that naturally led them to the conclusion you wanted them to reach. Information that led them to the conclusion that would maximize their potential and minimize their suffering. Doctor, Kim corrected. Zethkara, would you prefer that we had left them ignorant of their possibilities? Would it be more ethical to allow them to remain trapped in limitations that we could help them transcend? The question hung in the air between them like a philosophical trap. Zethkara realized that she was encountering the same choice that every species in the galaxy had faced over the past year. Accept human guidance toward advancement, or insist on maintaining independence while watching everyone else evolve beyond recognition. The Reformed Council session begins in an hour. Doctor, Kim said, changing the subject. Are you prepared to present your species' decision regarding the integration protocols? Zethkara's 4 hands clenched involuntarily. The integration protocols were humanity's latest offering to the galactic community. A comprehensive program that would allow any species to undergo the same kind of enhancement that the humans had developed during their 3,000-year exile. Enhanced intelligence, extended lifespans, transcendence of physical limitations, access to technologies that bordered on the miraculous. The cost was simple. Complete integration into the human collective consciousness, not assimilation or absorption, but partnership in a shared mental network that would connect every enhanced individual across the galaxy. My government is still debating, Zethkara admitted. What concerns them? The loss of individual identity. The fear that accepting integration means ceasing to be truly hegemony. Dr. Kim nodded thoughtfully. Those are understandable concerns. May I share something with you? Without waiting for permission, she activated a holographic display that showed the neural patterns of an integrated being. A former Kovani warrior who had accepted full integration 6 months ago. This is Captain Vortak, Dr. Vortak, Kim explained. He was one of the most outspoken opponents of human authority after the war. He insisted that he would rather die than lose his identity to human collective consciousness. The neural pattern on the display was incredibly complex, showing layers of thought and emotion that seemed impossible for any individual mind to contain. This is his mind now, Dr. Kim continued. He retains all of his memories, all of his personality traits, all of the characteristics that made him uniquely Corvani, but he also has access to the collective knowledge and experience of every other integrated being in the network. He can think with the combined intelligence of millions while remaining completely uniquely himself. But he's no longer truly independent, Zethkara pointed out. Is anyone truly independent? Dr. Kim asked. Your thoughts are shaped by your education, your culture, your interactions with others. You make decisions based on information provided by your government, your scientists, your advisors. How is integration different from any other form of social connection, except that it's more honest and more efficient? Before Zethkara could respond, the holographic display changed to show a real-time communication from Captain Vorthak himself. The former Corvani warrior appeared in the projection, but his appearance had been subtly enhanced. His biomechanical augmentations were more elegant. His posture showed confidence that bordered on serenity. Ambassador Zethkara, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been present before integration. Dr. B. Kim asked me to speak with you about my experience with the integration protocols. Captain, Zethkara replied carefully. You were quite vocal about your opposition to human authority during the surrender negotiations. I was terrified, Vortak admitted freely. I believed that integration would mean the end of everything I was, everything my people had been. I was wrong. He gestured, and the holographic display showed images of the Corvani homeworld as it existed now. The biomechanical cities had grown into something that transcended architecture, becoming living works of art that pulsed with the rhythms of their inhabitants' thoughts. Integration didn't take away our identity, Vortak continued. It amplified it. I am more Corvani now than I ever was before. I understand our history more deeply, appreciate our culture more fully, and see possibilities for our future that I could never have imagined alone. But you're connected to the human collective, Zethkara pointed out. Doesn't that influence your thoughts? Change your perspectives? Of course it does, Vortak replied with a smile. Just as my perspectives influence the collective. Integration isn't about losing yourself in a human-dominated network, Ambassador. It's about contributing your unique viewpoint to a growing tapestry of consciousness that becomes richer with each new voice. The transmission ended, leaving Zefkara alone with Dr. Kim and her own churning thoughts. Everything she had been told about human domination, everything she had feared about the loss of independence, was being systematically challenged by evidence that seemed to contradict her assumptions. The council session is beginning, Dr. Kim said gently. Shall we go? The reformed council chamber was unlike anything that had existed in the original Galactic Council. Instead of separate seating areas for different species, the chamber was designed as a single unified space where representatives could interact freely regardless of their physical requirements. Atmospheric fields allowed beings with different environmental needs to share the same space, while translation systems had been upgraded to convey not just words but emotions and intentions. At the center of the chamber stood Admiral Marcus Chen, the ancient human who had been present at humanity's original exile. But he was no longer alone. Around him stood representatives from every major species in the galaxy, each showing signs of the enhancements that integration had provided. Honored colleagues, Admiral Chen began, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber without technological amplification. 1 year ago, this galaxy was divided by fear, suspicion, and the limitations of individual perspectives. Today, we gather as partners in the greatest experiment in consciousness that the universe has ever seen. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the current state of galactic civilization. Trade routes that functioned with perfect efficiency because integrated beings could coordinate across interstellar distances. Scientific discoveries that advanced at exponential rates because researchers could share not just data but actual thought processes. Art and culture that reached new levels of complexity because artists could collaborate at the level of consciousness itself. The species that have chosen integration have seen benefits beyond their wildest dreams, Admiral Chen continued. Extended lifespans, enhanced intelligence, transcendence of physical limitations, access to technologies that were once considered impossible, but most importantly, they have gained perspective, the ability to see beyond their own limitations and contribute to something greater than themselves. He paused, and his gaze seemed to focus on the representatives of the species that had not yet chosen integration. However, we recognize that some beings prefer to maintain their current form of. We respect that choice, and we have no intention of forcing integration upon unwilling participants. This was the moment Zefkara had been dreading. The formal presentation of humanity's final offer to the galaxy. The integration protocols will remain available to any species that chooses to participate, Admiral Chen announced. But after today, they will no longer be actively promoted or encouraged. Species that prefer independence will be allowed to maintain their current civilizations and territories. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity was essentially offering the galaxy a choice between evolution and irrelevance. However, Admiral Chen continued, we must be honest about the practical realities of this choice. Integrated species will continue to advance at exponential rates. Their technology will become more sophisticated, their understanding deeper, their capabilities more extensive. Non-integrated species will find it increasingly difficult to participate meaningfully in galactic civilization. Dr. Kim had been right about fear transforming into gratitude. As Admiral Chen spoke, Zefkara could see the expressions on the faces of representatives from non-integrated species. They weren't angry or defiant anymore. They were terrified of being left behind. The vote before us today is simple, Admiral Chen concluded. Formal acceptance of the integration protocols as the standard framework for galactic civilization, with participation voluntary but consequences natural. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Even the species that had no intention of accepting integration themselves voted in favor of the protocols, recognizing that opposing them would accomplish nothing except to formalize their own obsolescence. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Zefkara found herself face to face with Admiral Chen. The ancient human studied her with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of millennia. You're wondering whether we planned all of this from the beginning, he said without preamble. Did you? We planned to return and reclaim our place in the galaxy, Admiral Chen replied. We planned to ensure that we would never again be vulnerable to exile or abandonment. Beyond that, we simply responded to the choices that other species made. But you guided those choices. We provided information and opportunities. The choices themselves were made freely, based on each species' assessment of their own best interests. Admiral Chen stepped closer, and his voice took on a tone of paternal kindness. Zethkara, your people are struggling with the same decision that every species has faced. Do you maintain your independence and accept gradual irrelevance? Or do you join us in becoming something greater than you ever imagined possible? And if we choose independence, then you will be respected, protected, and allowed to live as you choose for as long as your civilization exists. But you will increasingly find yourselves observers rather than